Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to our Sangha online. Next week we're having our first Jukai ceremony in Australia. 3 of our Sangha members are going to receive the Precepts. So I hope you can all come. It's fairly auspicious to have such a ceremony happening. The first one in Australia, actually, in Suzuki Roshi's Soto lineage. So I thought I would just show you talk a little bit about what Jukai is and what does it mean to receive the precepts, or take on the precepts. So the first thing I want to show you is a rakusu, and some of you will be familiar with this, but some not so familiar. So in preparation for receiving the precepts, one of the beautiful things in this tradition is that you sew a particular garment, and it's like a miniature robe. This is a full priest robe, and this one's made up of 7 panels, and you hand stitch them, and they're different sized squares, and they're sort of reminiscent of rice paddies, but also of the idea of stitching together discarded fabrics that you find, and you put them together to make something. So kind of like original kind of low impact living on the environment, using things, reusing things. So in preparation, and it often takes people up to a year, you sew your own miniature version. So it's like a little miniature robe. And when you take the precepts as a lay person, you sew them in blue. And then if you decide you wanted to become a priest, you would then sew another one in black, and you would also actually sew a whole set of robes. And so they're made of 5 panels, and you can see how it looks a little bit like rice paddies. And you're given a Dharma name, you're given a spiritual name, and this is a name that you can go by if you want to, or you can use it just in certain situations. Like in ceremonies you might use it, or you might use it with your teacher when you email. You might sign your name with your Dharma name, which is sort of indicating we're having a conversation about the nature of things, the great matter, and so you sign with that name. So I always sign, when I correspond with my teacher, I always sign my name Mushin, because my Dharma name is Kogen Mushin. Luminous goodness, dream forest, that's my Dharma name. So then on the back of your rakusu, the teacher puts their name. So that's my teacher's name. His is Luminous Owl, Midnight Liberation. And then the ordinand's name, so this is my name here. And their stamp, and the date and the location. And so then every time you put on your rakusu, before sitting, you put it on, or before any kind of Dharma-related activity, like you're studying or you're doing a class or doing dokusan, you put this on, and it's reminding you that you've received and taken on the precepts. You both receive them from the teacher and the Sangha and the whole of the ancestors, and you've taken them on, and you're going to endeavour to live your life as best as you can in accord with the precepts. And I was thinking about this in Zazen, that really all the different religions, their basic teaching is really very very simple, like be nice to yourself and be nice to others. Everyone really is an extension of yourself, or we're all made in God's image, or we're all God's children. So the teaching is very simple and very straightforward, but we, for whatever reasons, tend to have a lot of confused ideas about ourselves and about the world. And we have lots of complicated, confused ideas about ourselves and about the world. And that's why we need to have complex teachings, because the complex teachings are unpacking, carefully examining and unpacking, dismantling the confused ideas we have about the world and ourselves in the world. And we have this 16 precepts called the Bodhisattva vows, the 16 Bodhisattva vows, to help us remember this very basic truth that we and everything are one. Just we can hear the people having some kind of festivities next door, and we might have the mental habit of feeling like, I'm making a lot of noise. It's kind of disturbing my zazen. We might have a thought like that. Or we might have a thought like, oh, that's so great. You know, and they're different thoughts and they have different implications. And the mental habit has different implications throughout our life. What is our mental habit? Is our mental habit to sort of imagine them and see ourselves in them and feel kind of feelings of, I hope they're having a good time. Like, is that our impulse? Or is our impulse like, what the heck are they doing? They just do so many celebrations around here. What are they celebrating about? You know, we could have that sort of thought. Or, you know, even a more mean-spirited thought, you know. And all that awakening is, we hear about enlightenment and awakening, all that is actually really realizing the complete interconnectedness of everything, and that everything is us, and realizing it in all the fibres of our body, so that our natural, easy tendency is to feel a positive feeling towards anything. We hear something, we see something, we hear about someone, we hear about some people or about an event, and because we've had that experience, we just naturally lean in with a sense of intimacy towards whatever that is that we're hearing about. So our practice is to help us really realize this very simple truth. So the 16 Bodhisattva precepts, and we've got this amazing Buddha here with the many arms, many hands. These are and some of them have got many eyes. Sometimes on the hands they'll have an eye. So this is the Bodhisattvas that hears all the cries of the world and is receptive to all the cries of the world. These are the vows that we're taking, that we're endeavouring to be like that. To be a Buddha that does not tire out from hearing the cries of the world. However they arise, in just very mundane, unexpected, inconvenient ways sometimes, just the ways they arise. So in the ceremony, our 3 ordinands will be receiving the rakasus that they made. They'll be receiving their Dharma name, and then they'll receive each of the precepts, and we'll go through them one at a time. So I'll just go through them now, just a little bit. Obviously can't say terribly much about 16 of them, but a little bit about each one. So the first 3 are called the 3 refuges, and we're familiar with those. We chant those in the evening zazen. We chant them in Pali. In Sanskrit. No, in Pali. So I take refuge in Buddha, I take refuge in Dharma, I take refuge in Sangha. So one way to think of taking refuge in Buddha is that we adopt the posture. We sit in this posture. We sit like a Buddha. We sit as a Buddha. Cultivating awareness, cultivating present mind awareness. Buddha is just a personification of having continual awareness of what's actually happening. That's a warm-hearted awareness. That's what Buddha personifies. So we take refuge in that. We aspire for that. We cultivate that. We sit in this way. And it also means when we take refuge, it means when we're maybe confused or troubled, we can imagine an image of the Buddha. We can imagine an image like that and then see ourselves in that and then help decide, how should I act next? What should I say next? What should I do next? How should I think about this? Maybe if we're being self-critical, for example. We might be being self-critical, our breathings become a little constricted, we're judging ourselves somewhat harshly, or feeling embarrassed or something. We can imagine the Buddha. Oh, okay, it's not so fruitful. How can I be more warm-hearted towards myself right now? That's taking refuge in Buddha. And then taking refuge in Dharma. Dharma is one of those words that's got multiple meanings. Generally, people think of it as meaning the teachings, the Buddhist teachings, taking refuge in the Buddhist teachings, which is what we do. We study and we recite sutras. We read. Nowadays, of course, we can also listen and watch videos, which is a great new thing that we can do. So that's taking refuge in the teachings, contemplating them, thinking about them while we're going about our day, just letting them come to mind, trying to work out for ourselves how true does this feel for me. It's taking refuge in the Dharma. But the Dharma is also everything. The 10,000 things that's described as everything. So this is also the Dharma. So taking refuge in this life. Taking refuge in the life that we have, in this world that we have, in this place and moment that we are. Taking refuge in that. And then we take refuge in Sangha, which I think is always so warm. In the ceremony we say, taking refuge in Sangha as the perfect support. Take refuge in Buddha as the perfect teacher. Take refuge in Dharma as the perfect teaching. Take refuge in Sangha as the perfect support. So we take refuge in Sangha by turning up and sitting together. Our Sangha is also our community, our families, our city, our country, our planet, plants and animals in our garden. But taking refuge in Sangha is also looking after Sangha. So turning up to Zazen helps the Sangha, like it benefits everybody when we turn up. So we turn up for ourselves and we turn up for each other. So they're the 3 refuges, and then we have the 3 pure precepts, which originally came from the Dhammapada, and they've been kind of modified over time. In the earlier versions, there was a vow to not commit any evil. We don't tend to say that so much anymore. We've changed the wording more to lean into the more sort of positive way of wording it. So the way we word it in this lineage is, we vow to embrace and sustain standards of conduct is the first one. We vow to embrace and sustain all good. And I vow to sustain and embrace living beings. So the first one, I vow to embrace standards of conduct. For me, I think of that as it's a little bit more practical, like, how am I using my hands and my legs and my body and my words? What is my conduct like? So I'm vowing to sustain and embrace right conduct. And I think embrace is a nice word because it means not just I'm going to try and do it because I should, because none of these precepts are like that. They're really something to contemplate for ourselves and work out for ourselves. So we're embracing the idea, like we like this idea of right conduct. We want to have right conduct. Not because we should, because some external imaginary force says that we should, but because we embrace that idea of right conduct. Standards of conduct. And then we vow to embrace and sustain all good or good qualities. And I think if this is a little bit more to do with our mind, that within our mind we are cultivating this quality of goodness, of good quality in our thinking, like the way we spontaneously think about people making noise outside the zendo, for example. And then we vow to embrace and sustain living beings, which is our bodhisattva image, that we vow to hear the cries of the world and not get sick of doing it. This is a very important part, that we are not going to get sick of doing it. We're willing to do it for our whole lives and for all our future lives. And keep on doing it, just keep on doing it till there's no more suffering in the world. Which, as Suzuki Roshi might say, which is impossible, and that's why we vow to do it. We don't just vow to do possible things, that's not that interesting. We vow to do impossible things. That's our practice. Yeah. All right, so then the 10 grave precepts, and these will all sound fairly familiar. They're not that different to any other kind of commandments or lists about such things. The wording that we use, there's a couple of wordings I actually prefer, but for the ceremony we'll use the formal wording that's used in this tradition, and it's very simple and straightforward. So a disciple of Buddha does not kill is the first one. Very straightforward. I kind of like the wording, taking a disciple of Buddha takes up the way of not killing. I like the takes up the way. That's a Robert Aitken translation or way of saying it. Taking up the way, I like it because it gives some flexibility to really encourage us to decide for ourselves what is taking up the way of not killing. Like, not killing is a little kind of straightforward, although of course we can't not kill. We're killing every time we breathe. We're breathing in some little tiny singular cellular and multicellular things into our bodies, and when we eat, even if we're very strictly vegan, the plants, the harvesting of plants, of course, involves the accidental killing of all sorts of insects and disturbing of the soil and so on. So we can't not kill in any literal sense. That's pretty clear. So that's why I like taking up the way, so we can work out for ourselves in this moment what is the most, the way of doing least harm in this moment, given how complicated everything is. You know, we have to take into account how complicated everything is. Like, sometimes we might just buy a cup of coffee in a throwaway cup. We might just do that sometimes because we're just really tired. And so we have to care for ourselves, like not be so harsh on ourselves that we'll say, no, I'm never going to do that. I mean, maybe you can. Some people are very good that way. We have to work out how not to kill in all the subtle ways of what killing means. So not to be too hard on ourselves, not to be too hard on others. And also to, try not to kill in, the more obvious ways of not to kill. Like, generally try not to avoid stepping on insects and so on. Avoid over-consuming. But not to push that to the point that you're killing your own joy. So it's a complicated thing, which is why we all have to figure it out for ourselves. But we're vowing to take up that way of not killing. And so every time you put on the rakusu in morning zazen, before zazen starts, it's not that you necessarily will recite all of these, you might, but you'll just sort of know them all. You know that you took those vows and you did it in the presence of the Sangha and family members, witnessed you taking on these vows. So it becomes very powerful. Having sown my first rakusu, I think it was in 1997, I sowed my first rakusu. It's had a profound impact on my life. That very first rakusu, I mean all of them, but particularly the first one. There's something about making the effort of doing the sowing, knowing why you're sowing it, and then putting it on every time you do zazen, so maybe once or twice a day, and just remembering you've taken these vows and you were witnessed by others as you did it. And it makes it actually much easier to be skillful. It just gives you this little, it's such a skillful tradition. It gives you this little prompt when you're a bit tempted. You're in a group, someone's saying something mean-spirited about someone. It's really tempting to go, totally, I agree, absolutely, I find them so annoying too. You can feel so tempted to bond with the people in the group in that conversation, but you know about your rakusu, and you just, this is if, we're not all perfect, even in our thinking, so we might get tempted to join in, momentarily forget that that person is really ourself. But just at that moment of temptation, we remember our rakusu. And we just don't say anything. And then we say, oh, does anyone, we just sort of like gently change the subject without it being obvious. We don't do it in a way to shame anybody. We just gently guide the conversation in a different way or something like that. That's taking up the way of not killing. That's what that is. The first precept actually kind of captures all the others, but I'll just go through the others as well. We say, a disciple of Buddha does not take what is not given. So I like this way too. Do not take what is not given. It's a little more subtle than don't steal. Just got some subtlety to it. Don't take what is not given. There's lots of ways in which we can take. Like, take up too much of a conversation in a family gathering. Or there's all sorts of ways you can take a little bit too much. I can remember I used to take too much food when there was free food at like a buffet, or when you stay in a motel and there was a free bagels and donuts or something rather. In America, that's very common. Just take a little more than you actually need. And then after a while learn, like, I don't need to do that. I don't need to take too much. Just take the appropriate amount. So taking up the way of not taking what is not given. So lots of ways. That's a really great one to really contemplate. Not to take what is not given. And then a disciple of Buddha does not misuse sexuality. And that's sometimes also translated more broadly as just doesn't misuse their body, but not misuse sexuality. It's very important. It's such an intimate and vulnerable thing, sexuality. We have to really care for it in ourselves and in others, to really care for sexuality. And we have to work out for ourselves what that is. One of the lovely things about Buddhism generally, and I think Zen in particular, is it's not at all prescriptive, so we don't have opinions about things. That this is an okay thing, this is not an okay thing. It's like you need to work out for yourself whether this is an okay thing or not an okay thing. You have to work it out for yourself and be honest with yourself. And that's the discipline of the practice, is to be honest with ourselves and not to conveniently trick ourselves sometimes. Really look honestly at ourselves. A disciple of Buddha does not speak falsely. And sometimes, initially, speaking falsely is actually like lying. Just lying, straight out lying. But for most of us, we probably don't tend to lie anyway. But we might exaggerate a little bit, or we might omit something conveniently in some situation where it might be more appropriate to actually... Like, this didn't actually happen to me this morning, but as an example, someone in my daughter's house, the freezer had been left open, and someone kind of got like, why is the freezer left open? Who didn't put things in the freezer properly? And kind of got upset about it. If it had been me, it would have been the right thing for me to say, I think it was me, I'm sorry. It wasn't me, so I didn't have to. But had it been me, it would have been the right thing to not just go, oops, say nothing. The right thing would be, it's me, I'm sorry, I was just in a rush and I just didn't put things in properly. So they're the kinds of things that are more likely for us as practitioners, in these subtle ways. So that's not speaking falsely. Not intoxicating ourselves or others. And again, intoxicating, we have to figure out what that means. What does intoxicating mean for us? It might be fine to drink a little bit of alcohol or smoke a little bit of weed. Maybe that's fine. Maybe it's not fine. For each of us, we have to work that out. And of course, it doesn't just apply to just regular intoxicants. It applies to anything that's used to kind of try and not be engaged with reality. In what ways are we doing it too much? That's where I think it becomes an intoxicant. I think it's fine to sort of like take a break from our life and just watch a movie or any of those sorts of things. I think those things are great. It becomes an intoxicant when we do it too much, either to escape or to kind of try and feel more energized, like when people use a lot of stimulants, it's to feel more powerful. So we have to check in with ourselves. Why do I feel a need to be more powerful? Drink more coffee or whatever it might be. Why am I feeling that need? Is this good? Is this beneficial? So we have to work out what intoxicants are for ourselves and when it becomes an intoxicant and when it's not. You know, sometimes it's not an intoxicant until a certain point, and then it is. So all of that's for us to work out, and having a rakusu really helps us, motivates us to do that. A disciple of Buddha doesn't speak of others' faults. This is an interesting one because there is a way to speak of others' faults that's not judgmental, it's just a simple description. And sometimes it's a little confusing. You can say, I wonder if I can think of an example. I don't know, I can't think of a good example, but sometimes you can say, oh yes, that person, maybe that person does talk a lot, because that person does talk a lot. But you're not saying, oh my God, they talk so much. You might be able to acknowledge in a certain situation, yes, they do. They do talk a lot, it's true. You know, and you're not speaking falsely, you're not speaking ill of them or anything. It is true, and you can say it. There is a way to be able to. You don't have to be like. Got to be careful not to say a single word about anyone, about anything. There is a way, but you can do it with no malice. You can do it with a sense of care. Like, I'm a bit like that too, you know. That feeling. I'm a bit like that too. I can be like that as well. So we just have to be careful how we speak of others, particularly when they're not around. Speaking about people when they're not around. It's just a slightly risky thing. So you've always got to be careful when you speak about someone when they're not present. It's okay to, but just be aware, it's slightly tricky. And related to that is a disciple of Buddha doesn't praise self at the expense of others. And I like to emphasize it is good to praise yourself sometimes. It's nice to be able to celebrate your own, you know, what you're doing well in your life and what your talents are. It's good to be able to say, oh yeah, I'm quite good at that. Or if you do a painting, I really like that painting I did. Or like the way you play guitar or whatever you do. It's fine to do that, but just not at the expense of others. That's the critical part, not at the expense of others. Disciple of Buddha is not possessive of dharma or wealth. This again I think is a little bit like this. Whatever our abilities are, bring them forward and share them. The world benefits from us sharing our abilities. I really like to encourage people. Whatever you're good at, put it out there in the world. Don't be shy about it. Or don't be sort of like, oh, I'm not good enough. Like, you are good enough. Don't be stingy with your dharma. Share yourself. So that's a way of not being possessive, actually, is to share yourself. But here it's also talking just more straightforward. Don't be possessive of dharma or wealth. Don't be possessive of wealth is pretty straightforward, like don't hoard. It's always hard to believe that people can hoard so much money and wealth when there's so much need in the world, but people do. And we want to endeavour to not do that. To have enough. And we have to work out what enough is. Enough is a different amount for different people. A disciple of Buddha doesn't indulge in anger. I like the way Robert Aitken talks about anger. He talks about it being like two ways. He talks about it being like a diamond, something really beautiful that you only bring out every now and then. I think it's a really nice way to think of it. Every now and then it's appropriate to be angry. And I have some memory of hearing a teacher, I can't remember who now, talking about seeing someone beating a dog, and they jumped in and grabbed the dog and said, "That's God's dog," and grabbed the dog away from the person. And there's just something, that's an appropriate way. That's a moment. Not to direct the anger so much at the person, but at the situation. Don't beat the dog. Don't hit the dog. There's a certain angry energy that comes forth, but it's not really at the person, it's at the circumstance. So if we are going to have anger, it's very tricky. We have to be very careful that it's always for the benefit of beings that we have anger. And that's the other image that Robert Aitken talks about, is anger is like a wildfire, or like fire. It can be helpful, it can be useful, but it can get out of hand very fast. It can get out of control and do huge amounts of damage. But fire has its place. It helps certain seeds, regenerate. Indigenous people in all cultures use fire, well, maybe not all Indigenous cultures, but lots of cultures use fire beneficially. But you've got to be careful. It can be very dangerous. So anger's like that too. It can be very dangerous. It's so fast. And people feel it and react to anger so intensely, they'll remember it for decades. An angry outburst can be remembered for decades by someone. So we don't indulge in it. It doesn't say we don't ever get angry. Just don't indulge in it. And then the last one is a disciple of Buddha. It doesn't disparage the three treasures, which is Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, that we originally took refuge in. So we don't disparage it. Be very careful. I'm very reluctant to criticize other traditions or other teachers or other teachings. I just prefer not to go there. It's just risky. There are a few places that I acknowledge that it might be appropriate if a teacher has, is really misusing funds in a sangha or misusing their sexuality, and there are places where it needs to be called out. But it's always extremely sad when that happens. So to be very careful not to criticize the Buddha, the Buddhist teachings and Buddhist sanghas, just to be very, very careful. Again, we're taking up the way of not doing it. There might be a circumstance, but I tend to very much err on the side of not participating in conversations in any way, because I don't want to do anything to discourage anyone from practicing. It just feels like the most terrible thing to do is to discourage someone from practicing. All right, well, I think I better stop there. I'm going to plug this in so that when people ask questions, people online can hear. So I'm just going to change this view. I'll get rid of the pin here. And then I plug it in over here, and Mark's going to... So we might just lose sound for a second online. Can you hear me?
Yes, the sound is a bit more muffled than it was, but we can hear you, I think.
Okay, thanks, Russ. Do you want to put it not facing it, more facing it?
Hey, Russ, can you hear me?
Yes.
Did you have to do anything, or did it just automatically?
Just adjusted the mic.
Okay, so the computer just automatically switched.
It recognises it. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right, so would anyone like to comment, ask a question? Fine.
Is it going to be at the same time?
Oh, yes.
Usually.
Yeah, 10 o'clock. So we won't have Zazen next week. We'll just be here at 10 and go to a practice on Friday afternoon.
Sorry, where is the mic? It's not picking up anything specific, anything that you guys are saying. It's just as muffled as it always has been.
Oh, okay.
Maybe you have to.
Yeah, I think maybe I have to do something here.
Yeah.
it's maybe you can pick up these microphones.
Sorry, it's very sweet of you to try to make the sound better for us. Really appreciate it.
The volume. So usually it's a program.
Because you made it work last time.
That is random.
6 disappears.
That's better.
Oh yeah, but that's not
That's
picking
'cause
up
it's
everyone.
close.
We're trying to pick up people in the Zendo.
Sorry.
I think this is what we need.
So we haven't got
Oh,
power
look, that
to it yet.
wasn't on full. Oh, that wasn't turned on.
No, we
Oh,
haven't got
no.
power yet. So
Yeah, so we definitely had it selected on the right thing.
There's
the
two of those. Do you
power's
want to see
now
if the other
not
one
to
works?
it.
Yeah.
Let's try the one next to it and see if that works better.
See, that's the echo that you turned. I think we need to public it.
Yeah, because a little blue light normally comes
Yeah,
up on it, doesn't it?
Yeah. Okay.
Every moment is a perfect moment for awakening.
I feel so awake.
Maybe I'll just turn off the recording. We don't need to keep recording this bit.